I think we're going to go ahead and get started. For folks who don't know me, I'm Hillary Hayden. I'm the organizing director for the Trade Justice Education Fund, which is a national organization working to stop the damage of corporate-centered trade deals and promote a positive vision for international trade. These Trade Justice Power Hour calls happen every third Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and they cover a wide range of educational topics about trade policy for activists across the country. I do want to note quickly that these are not intended as press briefings. So if you're a member of the press, I'd be more than happy to chat with you separately, but this is not the place for press questions. Just by way of an agenda for today, I'm going to give a little bit of framing for our call. And then I'm going to hand it over to Riley Ohlson, the trade expert with the AFL-CIO, to discuss labor's priorities for a renegotiated USMCA deal. Some of these are encapsulated in the AFL-CIO's great new fact sheet on the USMCA, and others are in the Labor Advisory Committee report's comments that were recently sent into the Trump administration. After Riley speaks, we're going to have time for some of your questions before we move to talking about important action steps that folks can take in the coming weeks to help make a difference on this issue. So please go ahead and put questions in the Q&A for me, for Riley, as they come to you. We're going to get to as many of those as we can after Riley's presentation. And I think with that, we'll just jump in. So as many of you know, one of the biggest issues facing the trade justice movement right now is the review of the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA. That's the deal that replaced NAFTA a little bit over 5 years ago. When the original NAFTA went into effect back in 1994, working people across North America warned that it would be devastating for jobs, for wages, and for communities across the continent. And unfortunately, those predictions came true. NAFTA led to the outsourcing of over 1 million good manufacturing jobs. It hollowed out the U.S. manufacturing base, and it pushed down the wages of the jobs that were left. So, when presented with the opportunity to renegotiate that deal during the first Trump administration, civil society in the U.S. was ready to have that conversation. Labor, in particular, fought hard to get meaningful improvements to the deal and to fix some of the flaws of the original agreement. A lot of work went into getting allies in Congress to push for and then win important improvements before the USMCA was passed. New labor rights commitments in Mexico, limits on corporate tribunals, known as Investor State Dispute Settlement, or ISDS, and the new enforcement tool that folks have heard about on these calls called the Rapid Response Mechanism, which was the first time that we'd had a trade agreement with any real meaningful labor enforcement tools right in the body of the agreement. So now we've lived through 5 years of experience with the USMCA, and unfortunately, it's clear that it has not delivered on its promises, and it does need some more work. Corporations keep shifting jobs to Mexico to take advantage of poverty wages and under enforcement of the labor reforms, and the result is that wages in Mexico's manufacturing sector remain about 1/10 of U.S. levels, and offshoring of union jobs continues. Since the USMCA took effect, the trade deficit has also gone up by 74% with Mexico. Like I said, companies keep moving jobs and production to Mexico, undermining good jobs here and abroad, and collective bargaining power, and pitting workers against each other across borders. So, while the USMCA made some important steps forward from NAFTA, the core problems of this agreement still persist, and the promise of a fair deal that lifts up workers in all three countries remains unfulfilled. So that's why the USMCA review that's happening right now and that we've been discussing on these calls throughout this year is such a critical moment. Countries are going to be deciding on what changes they want to make to the agreement before potentially extending it for another 16 years. And the stakes are quite high, right, for rules that we might potentially cement for another 16 years. So we're really fortunate today to be joined by Riley Ohlson from the AFL-CIO, who's going to walk us through labor's perspective on what needs to change in the USMCA to make it deliver for working people and how we can organize to make that happen. So before Riley speaks, I want to remind folks again to put questions in the Q&A. We're going to get to as many of those as we can. Riley, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Happy to be here. Thanks, everyone, for your interest and time during this hectic period for this critical issue. Hilly did a great job setting the table, so you may hear a couple things twice, but I think it's important just to underscore some of those important points from labor's perspective. So as Hilary mentioned, my name is Riley Ohlson. I cover trade and manufacturing as a ledge rep for the AFL-CIO and also staff our Industrial Union Council, which is 12 unions in the industrial space, representing about 4.5 million members. There's a lot to cover, and I'm sure based off the some of the names I recognize and organs I recognize in the chat, there are gonna be some really good questions, so I don't want to filibuster. So I'll just quickly touch on a few big picture things. First, I'm going to kind of go over again some of what Hillary talked about, why NAFTA and USMCA have been so devastating for our affiliates and members and our movement. A couple of the improvements in USMCA that led to AFL-CIO's endorsement at the time, and then what's next, and what does labor need? What do we think is necessary to make this deal worthwhile and to keep it alive? So first, again, based off of what I've seen in the chat, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, probably not a lot of news to you, but I think maybe just because I see how this is talked about in DC all the time, I do just want to underscore how destructive NAFTA was. I think we often in policy circles talk about trade in a very wonky way. The number of jobs, the trade deficit, which has, by the way, ballooned since USMCA. But I think it's really important to just underscore just what a weapon this was treated, or how free trade in this NAFTA deal in 1994 was weaponized to undermine worker power. It's not just trade deficits, it's unionized workers showing up to the table and being told, take less or we can move this facility. It's workers standing up and trying to form a union, being told, if you certify, we'll shift. A great study from the mid to late 90s actually put numbers behind this, that companies were in fact doing this both during collective bargaining as well as in efforts to form a union. And it really shifted power and leverage in a way that has made life a lot harder for hardworking people in a number of different sectors across our country. And one thing I do underscore is I think a lot of time also, maybe this again is the DC glasses, this is treated as sort of a phenomenon of the past, but the threat of offshoring continues to put downward pressure on wages, even as productivity has climbed, the last couple of decades. And we're still seeing jobs being offshored when workers stand up for themselves. Sadly, but perhaps not surprisingly, we're often seeing this shortly after workers have the gall to stand up and strike for their fair share. Just in the last 5 or 6 years, we've started a cursory search among our affiliates. We're well over 20 states, dozens of facilities that have closed since then, with work shifting to Mexico. Some pretty famous names you've probably heard, from Nabisco to Case New Holland to John Deere. Other companies maybe less well known in the aerospace and auto supply chains. And so this is an ongoing issue, and this is something we absolutely have to fix moving forward. So I want to quickly cover next two major updates to NAFTA that were supposed to fix this dynamic, to fix this credible threat of offshoring, and talk a little bit about how they've been doing. First, I think is I want to talk about the larger picture of tools to raise standards in Mexico. One of the challenges about this, I think in America, we often think about, things in sports terms, one team wins, one team loses. The way NAFTA was structured, workers in all 3 countries lose because they're being pitted against each other. And so the idea behind some of the changes to USMCA was to include tools that would raise standards in Mexico to try and address the wage gap that made the prospect of offshoring so credible. And then second, to strengthen rules of origin. It's a little dry, a little wonky, but basically make sure more of the benefits of the market access in this deal accrue to the 3 countries who are party to it. So first, on the raising standards piece, I'll break this down into sort of 2 very big buckets. It's obviously a lot more complex, and happy to go into it more. But the first major component was Mexican labor law reform. This was to address the threats of violence against workers and just a litany of other practices used to bust unions. I think it's, I work very closely. Some of you may know Eric Gottwald from our international department who does this, and they're in close contact with our brothers and sisters in Mexico to keep up to date on this. And certainly some progress has been made, but a lot of significant challenges remain. And I'll just highlight 2 for now. First, resources matter. Mexico's latest budget slashed funding to the federal center, which is responsible for settling labor law disputes, by about 1/3. And second, the federal center itself does not seem to have the authority to impose fines on Mexican employers, which, as you can imagine, is a major problem when you're trying to have a functioning labor justice system. There are other issues we can certainly discuss more, but I'll just highlight those two. Second is the rapid response mechanism. As some of you on this call may know, because I see a lot of orgs that help lead the charge, the RRM was included to address some of these systemic labor rights challenges in Mexico by allowing for facility-specific interventions. And to date, we've seen this as a successful enforcement tool. I think the labor movement's proud that we were able to include such a great innovation for workers in this. We've seen, I think, over 30 complaints with tangible improvements for something like 40,000 plus Mexican workers. That has led to instances where there are now free and fair elections, unions being able to negotiate strong collective bargaining agreements, wrongly dismissed workers being reinstated, real impacts for those workers. And we support the RRM. We would like to see it strengthened. But I think it's also important to note that 40,000 is a small percentage of the overall workforce in Mexico, particularly, especially in manufacturing, where there are millions of workers. And so what we've seen is, because of sort of the stop and go nature of the Mexican labor law reform, as well as the scope of RRM, there hasn't really been a dent in the wage gap between U.S. and Mexican workers in the manufacturing sector. And that persistence has continued to lead to offshoring. And as I mentioned, a variety of sectors: agriculture, implements, food processing, bakeries, et cetera. And so, we want to continue to strengthen RRM, but that alone is not going to change the math enough to impact workers in the way we want to see it happen. The second major update I want to talk about here is rules of origin. So these say that a certain percentage of the content of a good needs to be made in Canada, the United States, or Mexico to qualify for the deal. In other words, to be exported from, say, Mexico to US or US to Canada without paying, our baseline duties or tariffs. These are supposed to keep countries who have not offered anything to us or Canada or Mexico from benefiting from the enhanced market access. We are supportive of rules of our origin in general, but again, on this front, more needs to be done, both to strengthen some of the existing rules of origin. Auto was a main focus the last go around, and also to expand and look at other sectors. Aerospace, is a key one for us, and some of our affiliates. Large appliances. There are a number of different sectors worth reviewing in both durable and non-durable industries. And I think important to note, one of the developments that we've really seen over the last 6 or 7 years since this first started being negotiated, and I think relates to rules of origin, is the phenomenon of both Chinese exports to Mexico, as well as investment in Mexico. Because that's raised specter of a number of concerns around both the transshipment of goods, as well as the nature of the FDI, foreign direct investment into Mexico. Naturally, between the tariffs on some Chinese goods, as well as USMCA, has made Mexico a very attractive location for Chinese companies looking to get around those actions by the United States. And so we're trying to better understand how that's working and ways to curtail it. In addition to continuing to strengthen both labor standards, rules of origin, a few other items I'll mention in a second, I do want to emphasize one point, especially here. In order for a successful USMCA renegotiation, we also have to be sure that there are measures in place that effectively deter firms from non-compliance. So what does that mean? If you are let's just say automobile, because it's one of the most common examples, an automobile manufacturer, and you have a facility in Mexico, if you decide you don't want to meet the rules of origin, you don't want to certify the labor value content standard, which is a certain percentage of the workers have to make a certain amount of money. You don't want to do all that. You can just export to the United States outside of the USMCA. The tariff, the baseline duty rate there is about 2.5%, and it may be worth it to you just to go around it. And so one of the things we want to make sure we stay ahead of is, as you continue to strengthen labor standards and rules of origin and all these other provisions to help workers in all three countries, you really have to watch non-compliance. After USMCA went into effect, we saw a lot of autos and auto parts starts just to ship outside the agreement altogether. And so all the great work we're doing to strengthen standards will be rendered moot if we aren't able to address that. Um, then in terms of what comes next, other issues. So I've mentioned a few of them. I'm just going to quickly tick through because I realize it's been going on for a bit here. Tick through some of the um, big picture issues, and then happy to pause and take questions or go into more detail. So I mentioned the wage gap. I think we are continuing to push to raise labor standards in Mexico. And I should at this point note, we are working to push labor standards in all three countries. We realize that we are in a very strange time in the United States, and we are not draping ourselves in glory at the moment with how we are treating workers. And obviously, we are fighting that, but we want to be able to fight on all fronts on that issue. But to really do that, to address the wage gap in the long term, medium term, but in the short term, also find ways to get that more quickly as we work to raise labor standards. Technical assistance funding is a little wonky, but the money that is needed to help the Mexican government, put in place reforms and do enforcement and do monitoring. Forced labor is another really important issue to the AFL-CIO and our affiliates, and we want to see stronger, enforcement of the forced labor ban. That has been pretty lacking by both Mexico and Canada to date. A few other items. Digital trade is very important to a number of our affiliates. That's an area we are closely monitoring. I'm happy to go into more detail if there are questions there. Country of origin labeling in the agricultural sector is very important. We have a number of affiliates and a lot of workers in food processing. And so consumers deserve to know where their food is made and have the right to know that. And it helps our workers because we know that consumers want to support their neighbors and good standards when they're purchasing food. And then finally, environmental standards. We want to see those strengthened, both because all of our affiliates members are community members. They want a planet with clean air and clean water, but also because it leads to when there are differing standards, it leads to companies chasing the lowest standards and having lower compliance rates and putting manufacturers in places where there are higher standards and more rigorous environmental rules at a disadvantage, and we want to remove that that gap. Excuse me, I apologize everyone for that. Starting to lose my voice. So to wrap up, there's a lot we have to do. I think it is a very exciting time. One of I probably should have mentioned one of the most novel innovations is that for the first time ever, there was a review period put into one of these deals. It is mind blowing that Congress will do surface transportation reauthorization every 5 years, or the defense bill every year, and we sign a free trade deal, largely negotiated behind closed doors, and that's just in place for forever. And so this is kind of a new and interesting experience to be able to go back and look and see how something has done. And so we are mobilizing to make sure that we see real significant changes in this deal before we can accept it moving forward. So I will pause there and see what questions there are on some of the content. I know that was a lot to throw into one little spiel, but I appreciate everyone bearing with me.
No, that was super helpful, Riley. A lot of good information there, and I just want to say really quickly the review process is something that like civil society pushed really hard, right, to get into the agreement so that we would have this chance to not go another 23 years without revisiting this. I often, when I give presentations to community groups, say the difference between 1994 and 2017 is the internet, e-commerce, like all these digital trade rules. There's so many things that change in that amount of time. It's an eternity for public policy. And to not revisit it is crazy.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of questions in the Q&A feature for you. Um, I think a common thread and a place I would really like to start is can you talk a little bit about how the AFL has been engaging with labor allies in Canada and Mexico, the work that you're doing to support independent unions in either of those countries? Just share with us a little bit about what the international landscape looks like.
Yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, we actually have an entire international department dedicated to this. I sit on the other side, focusing mostly on the domestics, um, but they are in regular contact with our counterparts in Mexico as well as Canada. We also work closely. I'm sure many folks are familiar with the Solidarity Center, who have been engaging directly, and we have been. It's time has lost all meaning in 2025 because of just the churn and volume of chaos that comes. But only a few months ago, we were in a big fight over, the administration's attack, and we're still obviously pushing hard for this. And there's a lawsuit out there that we are not party to, but others are pushing around things like iLab, which is a segment of the Department of Labor that assists with some of the capacity building in Mexico. Uh, uh, I mentioned technical assistance. We have been pushing for appropriations for the last year and a half here in the United States to fund the kind of resources that are necessary to make this happen on the ground, because it is a challenge. The protection system. It's too bad Eric couldn't join to get in the details, but the protection system, protection unions are so entrenched that it is a challenge in being able to provide support to those people fighting the good fight is so critical. And so we're working very hard both on the resources as well as on the collaboration front. And I know our affiliates are also doing direct touches there. And then Canada, we actually got a head start on that collaboration thanks to the president's IEPA, International Emergency Economic Powers Act tariffs on Canada. Because we've been engaging with them since then about that issue in particular, and then how it sort of rolls over into the USMCA NAFTA to review. Because again, I just want to underscore, um, NAFTA was a model that really we all recognize hurt workers in all three countries. And so I think the best way that we're going to be able to move forward is find a way that doesn't pit us against each other. And so we're really trying to keep those lines of communication open.
Super helpful. So many questions. I was thinking the exact same thing that there's a lot of questions about Mexico that Eric is probably a little bit more well.
This is going to be a long process. I assume you've already done the timeline, so I didn't do that in my
Yeah,
spiel.
yeah, don't worry about it.
We are happy to come back and have more conversations. We really appreciate the passion that you all have for this issue, and it's, as you mentioned, it is folks like the folks on this call that drive the members to do the right. Some of the members, of course, will do the right thing, but that help create that momentum for good policy.
So, I'm gonna ask you just in this same vein quickly to dig in a little bit on where you see progress or not progress in terms of allowing workers and unions to bring trade complaints for labor violations. I know the rapid response mechanism has been a key part of this, but just wondering if you have any um, more insight to share on that.
The only thing I would add is one of the things we are hoping to improve upon is the speed with which these are resolved. The name is eluding me at this time, and I'm happy to follow up with details so you can distribute it to the group. But there was one where it was an incredibly cut and dry case, and it went to panel, and it was totally unnecessary. But our view that it was unnecessary to go to panel. We thought it could have been resolved much more quickly. And I think that's one of the things we want to think about is how do we get this process to move faster so that, I mean, we all know this in the United States. It can take, winning the certification for a new union is only the first step, and you actually have to get a contract. And that can get dragged on for months and months and months. And so I think time and speed is so critical, and that's something that we're really looking at and figure out how we can fix that and improve that.
I'm gonna jump in on that question also just to add a little bit of context from the original NAFTA that only
Mhm.
had side agreements, right, as
Yep.
enforcement for labor, for environment, kind of added after the fact as a little bit of an afterthought. And those
A little window dressing for, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And those side agreements had avenues, right, for people to bring complaints, but oftentimes they would take years and years and years to get any kind of result from the process. And by then, workers have moved on, they have found new jobs, they have moved, there's displacement involved a lot of times for families. Like, we needed a system that worked faster. And so, in some ways, rapid response has been a helpful tool in that sense. I think it's 6 months. Is that true, Riley? That they have to come to some kind of conclusion?
Let me confirm because I think there
Okay.
are there are some asterisks, but I believe so. But
Okay. So it's my impression is that it's an improvement on those side agreements, but that there's still a lot of room
yes,
for us to make some real meaningful improvements to make sure that people can get some action more quickly. Uh,
yes. A summary. We an improvement, but we need to do better and do more.
okay, I want to thank people for all your questions. There's so many of them coming in. I'm gonna take a second to look at them. But Riley, you mentioned this a little bit. I want to pitch a question to you about this. What is the AFL's view on the digital trade language that Trump snuck into the USMCA? I know from working on this that the Biden administration withdrew support for those kinds of proposals and trade deals at the WTO. Do you think that we can get this language out of the USMCA through the renegotiation process? What's the AFL's thinking on those digital trade rules?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, for us, and it's actually there's this weird kind of parallel that's been happening federally lately. I don't know how many folks are following artificial intelligence regulation in the United States, but there have been multiple runs. There's one right now. Part of the reason my last few days have been so hectic, and you don't get a PowerPoint today, is there was another one to essentially create a moratorium where the federal government, despite having no guardrails for the safe and responsible use of artificial intelligence, how it's developed, how it's deployed, how it impacts folks, whether it's through employment, civil rights, et cetera. Even though there are none of those at the federal level, basically preempting and blocking states from regulating anything. And they have attempted that multiple times, both through the reconciliation bill uh, and now through the defense bill. And I think we see a lot of parallels with some of the trade where instead of the federal government trying to preempt the states, I think our guiding light is making sure that uh, trade agreements do not preempt the U.S. government, both the federal level or the states, from engaging in responsible regulation. And so that's going to continue to be a priority of ours. It's included in our backgrounder as well as our comments from the Labor Advisory Committee. Uh, I do not have a good answer for you on its prospects, but we always push for what we believe is right, and as we hope all you will too, and we'll see how that lands.
Thank you for that. I did not have any questions submitted to me ahead of time about this, but there are some questions in the Q&A just about workers that are being impacted by job loss due to trade, which we're sort of familiar with TAA and those kinds of programs. Emmanuel asked for workers impacted by job loss due to trade. Are there new resources like TAA benefits that are part of the conversation? Is there any communication coming from the Department of Labor about if those petitions are helpful? I understand they're still asking workforce professionals to still file the petitions. Do you have any insight here?
Yeah, don't want to be too negative, but not only are there not new resources, we are still fighting tooth and nail to get the old resources back. We've even gotten in a few fights on unrelated, or not unrelated, but other pieces of trade legislation um, that are essentially giving sort of tariff breaks, unilateral tariff breaks for various countries, because we think it's sort of crazy to be spending billions of dollars to help importers when we can't put up a few hundred million for workers who've lost their job through no fault of their own, especially at a time when employers are claiming they can't find workers. You think you would want to train a fund a proven and successful retraining program like TAA. We are on year 3 now. Yikes. Year 3 now of elapsed authorization. We are well over 130,000 workers on petitions awaiting review. It is still helpful to file. I know it is cumbersome. It can be some work to do so, but it's the only way we know that this is still happening. I mean, we know this is still happening, but it really helps uh, to be able to cite that number. And I do think the fact that it's been lapsed so long has probably discouraged a number of folks from filing. So that number probably is likely an undercount. But we really need to address this. It is just unconscionable that it's gone this long.
I knew when I asked the question that there was not great news about TAA, but I thought it would be good to at least talk about it a little bit here.
Yeah, no, it's important. And if folks want to call their legislators. If you live in Republican districts, it has even large facility closures in some districts has not prompted movement. And so, any pressure folks want to generate, it drives me nuts. I know I'm being recorded, so I'm going to try to modulate my feelings, but it is just, it's absolutely absurd.
This is a pretty good question. It seems like the Trump administration is announcing these new mini trade deals with other countries on nearly like a weekly basis. I'm imagining that none of them have the kinds of labor enforcement tools, the wage conversation, the RRM, these sorts of things that we're talking about. Do you have any insight on that and also suggestions on how we might stay on top of them as they sign these little country by country agreements?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges, and this maybe would be better suited for follow on for some of our international folks to talk about the labor piece. But one of the challenges is the process is so opaque; it's hard to even answer. I mean, we have heard that they have tried to include labor provisions, but I think there are pretty serious questions about how enforceable they are, and then also how durable is it if it's based off of a tariff regime that can change so rapidly. Of course, the AFL-CIO supports strategic tariffs. There are a number of approaches to tariffs where an investigation is conducted. There are thoughtful tariff levels to have the desired outcomes. We are fully supportive of those. But some of these other tariffs that have shifted so dramatically and without necessarily a clear rationale to us, or at least one that makes sense to if your goal is to really, reshore jobs and to have a more balanced trade relationship. It's really hard to see how that is gonna pan out. And so I think it's we are in a place of skepticism at the moment, to put it mildly. But in terms of more detail, I think it'd be helpful to have some more of our folks join us for another go around.
That makes sense to me. I will share just a little bit on the point that you're making around enforcement, that folks who've done a lot of work in this space are really used to seeing agreements that have enforcement for the kinds of tools that businesses want enforcement for, and then nothing on environment, nothing for labor to be sure that those things happen. And so I think that's a really important piece, right, for any of these things, because you can have or I think the IPEF language is like shall strive or shall continue. I think it was shall continue to
Yeah.
strive to respect labor rights.
Rules, yes, rules for corporations, guidelines for people. It's yeah, shall strive.
Riley, do you have any insight on whether you think Congress is going to get a vote on the USMCA renegotiation?
I think if the administration has said they want to engage in a serious renegotiation to address some of these lingering issues. If they do that, I think Congress would certainly be in the right to expect that they should have a role doing so, and we would want to see that. Again, I think probably the most tricky job to have in this current environment is trying to prognosticate on what the administration will do in a given week. Um, so I'm not sure what exactly their view is, but we have heard they want to make significant changes, and if they do that, we believe that should go before Congress.
That makes sense to me. Um, is there so many questions about the rapid response. Is there any alternative that you can think of to the sort of facility specific enforcement, so that corporations could be held accountable if a plant closes? Um, is
Yeah,
that
so
is that in your mind the best tool, the facility specific piece?
I think you these are issues that have been entrenched for decades. This, I'm going to do my math, 31 years this deal has been in place, and sort of this more broader free trade approach, we're looking at 40, 50 years, maybe longer, depending on who you ask. And so I think it really has to be an all of the above. So I think are, looking at the rapid response mechanism, finding ways to, enhance resources for it, strengthen it, speed it up, uh, is super helpful. But on its own, it will not be enough. And so that needs to be supplemented, like I mentioned a little bit in kind of high level terms, by serious labor reforms. Like the federal center needs to both be able to and to follow through with penalties that are meaningful to change broader industry behavior. Because one of the challenges with the RM is it has had really positive impacts for the workers at that facility, but another facility in the exact same industry, one state over, could have a completely different experience, and it doesn't necessarily change life for them. And so I think it is a part of the solution. It can't be the only part. If that answers the question. There's also, I should mention, we have some affiliates who are looking into this, and we've been exploring how do are there ways, to raise wages. Oh, it's like a tongue Dr. Seuss there. Are there ways to raise wages more quickly? Looking at one attempt at that in the previous round was the labor value content, based off of where we're seeing wages in Mexico right now. And how it was implemented, it hasn't really moved the needle. But are there ways to strengthen or amp that up, or look at something like a couple of affiliates are talking more and more about a minimum wage that would address some of that more quickly? And so there are a lot of different ideas that we're batting around. And so we're going to stay engaged on that question, because I do think it's an all of the above approach.
That's super helpful. There's so many questions, and there's a few really specific ones, Riley, that I might send to you with contact information for folks
Yeah.
separately, like about specific
Right.
annexes and pages with detail
Oh,
from
yeah.
the document.
Yeah, and we're happy to follow up with folks and dig more in the weeds.
Okay.
That's probably more, a better approach for those ones.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm gonna pitch one more question to you that I
Mhm.
think is from some friends at UFCW. And I'm just gonna read you the question. It says, given Trump's opening our border to Argentinian beef, the Northern Plains Resource Council, RCAF, Montana Farmers Union, and the Montana Cattlemen have formed a statewide coalition of grassroots ranchers to pressure the Montana congressional delegation to support COOL, which resulted in Representative Zinke signing on. Do you have thoughts about tapping into some of this anger and making a more concerted effort to push for COOL? Which is
Yeah.
origin labeling, sorry, for folks that are not into all the acronyms.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. So country of origin labeling, essentially, if you buy beef at the grocery store, they are not required. And in fact, because of Hillary, help me here, was it WTO that overruled it, or was it? It was an actual one of the. I don't know if it was an ISCS case or WTO. I think it was WTO.
I would have to look.
I
Sorry.
will confirm. All right, yeah, I will confirm for folks if they're interested. But actually, there was a trade case brought against WTO. Thank you, Arthur. There we go, and Clayton. Basically saying you can't have laws that require this. And so, I know I've spoken with folks over at UFCW in the DC office, and that's something we want to continue to push for. And I do think that I haven't been too in the weeds on the Argentina case, but it is clear that it has rankled folks from a number of different corners who aren't normally necessarily jumping uh, jumping up to lead on some of the sort of workers' issues in trade. And I think there is a nice confluence there that maybe we can leverage into some more positive outcomes.
That's super helpful. I know that we've been in touch with some folks working on Cool from like the food justice side of things, and one of them spoke on the Power Hour last month. So I
Nice.
know there's some energy around that. Um, okay. I want to give a big thank you to all the folks that submitted the many questions in the Q&A. Riley, I'm gonna have our staff download these and send them so that you can address some of the like more specific detailed ones if you
Yeah,
want.
of
Um,
course.
awesome. So I think I want to make sure that we have time to talk about the action steps and the Delora letter and all of that. So I think we're going to leave the Q&A right there for now. Can we just get a big thank you to Riley in the chat, or some people like to do the little reactions. Just a big thank you, Riley, for you taking time to share with us about the fact sheet, the Labor Advisory Committee. Um, report and the other work that the AFL is doing to try to get a good USMCA deal. We really appreciate you being able to
Of
share.
course. Can I take 30 more seconds? Two
Sure.
things.
Yeah.
First, I think just to underscore how important this is to labor, we have three different people touching different parts of it. So we are all happy to come back anytime and get in more weeds of different parts. I also failed to mention the IMLab report. So if folks want to really dig in and see more detail on how the labor reforms have been going and where they've been falling short, there is a very thoughtful, very detailed report that's been done where folks can dig in more there. And thank you all again for all the time and the great questions.
Thank you so much, Riley. All right. So I want to turn now to a few action steps that folks can take. There are three concrete actions I'm hoping that folks can take today and in the coming weeks to move our work forward toward a better USMCA deal. The first one is easy. Please take a minute to read the excellent AFL-CIO fact sheet that Riley just walked us through. I think Clayton's going to drop a link so that folks can access that in the chat. Being grounded in some of these key priorities around the USMCA and sharing those with labor partners that you work with is an essential first step. I am going to share, I see people asking in the Q&A if you're going to get a recording, and there will be a follow-up email that has all these links in them as well. So if you're not able to click through everything while I'm talking, don't worry about it. They will all be in your inbox, I hope, tomorrow morning. So that's the first step. Take a look at the AFL fact sheet. Please read it. Please share it with folks. The second step I'm hoping that folks can take, and again, Clayton's going to drop a link in the chat in just a second. That link leads to an Action Network tool that will let you send the AFL fact sheet directly to your member of Congress. There are several members of Congress that have already taken positions on the USMCA renegotiation, which we're going to talk about again in just a minute. But it's good to remind those folks of what we're wanting to see out of the agreement and be sure they know that people are paying attention. There are also several members of Congress that have not taken a position yet, and it's good for those folks to be hearing from their constituents as well as they make decisions about their position. So again, please take a second to go into Action Network, submit that tool to your member of Congress to send the AFL fact sheet in. So lastly, a lot of you have joined calls over the past few months where I've asked you to contact your member of Congress about signing on to a congressional letter on the USMCA. I want to extend a really big thank you to everybody who did office recess, office visits and drop-offs, sent emails, made phone calls, met with staffers virtually or in person as the deadlines got closer and closer over the last few weeks. Just a big thanks to anybody here who did anything to do outreach on that letter. Because of your work, 105 members of Congress signed on to that USMCA letter, and the letter itself was submitted to the administration in early November, I think on November 3rd. So great work, folks here. All of that outreach made a big difference in getting members to sign on. I think Clayton's going to drop one more link into the chat. Thank you so much, Clayton. So this is an Action Network tool that will let you see which members of Congress signed on to the letter. There's a little paragraph in there that has all of their names. If your member of Congress signed on to this letter, please take a second to submit the little Action Network form and send them a thank you note. There's some draft language in there. You're more than welcome to add a little bit of your own commentary, especially if you went to their office or did phone calls, that kind of thing, into their office. We've talked a lot before about how important it is for members of Congress to hear from their constituents as they take positions, but it's equally important that they hear from us when they do the right thing. A lot of you played a key role over the last few months in educating your members, helping them move toward the right position on the USMCA. And getting positive feedback from constituents reinforces that for them, right? That they made the right decision, and it reinforces commitment to the issue over the long haul. So please take a moment to check whether they signed the USMCA letter and send that thank you message. Again, want to say thank you to everyone here who took action to help us get to that 105 signer mark. Great, great work. I want to take a quick look and be sure if there are not other questions. Yes, there will be a recording to this call that we share with all these resources. Okay. Okay. Seeing no other questions. I just want to take one more second to thank Riley for his time, for sharing about what the AFL-CIO is pushing for. Riley, do you have any last words? I know you jumped in right at the end, but do you have any last words you want to offer to folks?
No, no, just thank you. This is going to be a real fight, and we'll need you, and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Riley. Um, Thanks to folks that were able to attend. Again, you're going to get a follow-up email, I think tomorrow morning, in your inbox that's going to have a recording of this call, the resources we discussed, including the AFL fact sheet and the Labor Advisory Committee report, and all the links to the Action Network tools and that kind of thing. So please be on the lookout for that, and please take the actions if your member of Congress did sign the USMCA letter. And I think that for now, I think that's it. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.